We know a large number of prisoners left for the interior of Germany from Auschwitz on death marches. But what were the camps like when they arrived? And were they any better than Auschwitz? In this video, I'm going to specifically talk about the conditions in Bergen-Belsen, as many people were sent there from Auschwitz during and in the months leading up to the death marches. Anne and Margot Frank and fellow Secret Annex member Augusta van Pels were among them. Bergen-Belsen served many purposes during its tenure. Both Soviet and Allied POWs were kept there. Jews with passports to neutral countries were also kept in the exchange camp. While the POWs were in appalling conditions, including some literally living in holes, the exchange prisoners were kept mildly healthy so they could be sent to another country without suspicion. Anne, Margot, and Auguste, however, were sent to the newly established women's camp, where most of the arrivals from the death marches were imprisoned. As you can see from this photo taken at Liberation, conditions were horrific. The camp already was not equipped for those who arrived in before the death marches. And once the large groups arrived from Auschwitz, conditions were literally unable to sustain life. From November 1944, prior to the large-scale evacuation of Auschwitz, around 8,000 women who were mostly Jewish lived in tents without floors and mainly in the mud. The Frank sisters and Mrs. Van Pels also lived there. When the tent camp was destroyed in a storm, the women were moved to a terribly overcrowded women's camp. There were nowhere near enough latrines for the number of women there. They lacked access to clean water, and the SS were frequently unable to feed those in the camp. The water they had access to carried disease. Although there were no gas chambers, some survivors described the conditions as worse than Auschwitz.
Several days later, we arrived to Bergen-Belsen. And Bergen-Belsen was hell on earth. Nothing ever in literature could compare to anything what Bergen-Belsen was. When we arrived, the dead were not carried away anymore. You stepped over them. You fell over them if you couldn't walk. They were agonizing people, begging for water. They were falling into planks that they were not pulled together in the barracks. They were crying, they were begging. It was hell. It was hell.